If you believe Cleopatra died from a snakebite, then you only know a myth. The truth was far darker, far more brutal, and far more carefully engineered. Imagine this. You are standing outside a sealed stone chamber in Alexandria. Inside is the most powerful woman in the ancient world, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. She has been imprisoned for 7 days. Every morning her body is searched, making sure she has nothing she could use to end her life. At night, you hear footsteps across the stone floor. Sometimes you hear her whispering, as if someone is there, even though she is completely alone. Rome's ruler, Octavian, wants her alive. Not to save her, but to break her. He wants to drag her through Rome in chains, to display her before the crowd, to humiliate her publicly. But Cleopatra knows that humiliation is worse than death. Her children are being used as weapons against her. Every day she is told, "If you live, your children live." On one side is motherhood. On the other, dignity. Both paths lead to destruction. But after 10 days, she makes a decision Octavian never expected. She chooses death in a way that changes history forever. The question is, did she truly win, or did she lose the greatest battle of all? Find out the real truth in the next part. Subscribers, My Real History, It's You, are standing outside a locked chamber in Alexandria. Inside is Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, the most powerful woman in the ancient world. She has been sealed in there for 7 days. You hear her sometimes moving across stone floors, her voice speaking as if someone else is there. But you know she is completely alone. Guards search her body every morning, looking for anything she might use. The popular story says she died peacefully, with a snake hidden in figs. That story is a lie. What actually happened inside that room was far more calculated and far more cruel. The version of Cleopatra's death, is propaganda. An asp hidden in a basket of figs, a peaceful end on a golden couch, loyal servants by her side. It is romantic, tragic, almost beautiful. But beauty was never the point. Control was the point. The story came from Octavian himself. He needed Rome to believe a specific narrative. The dangerous Eastern queen who seduced Mark Antony. The foreign threat who had to be eliminated. The exotic death by Egyptian cobra that fit perfectly into his triumph. Every detail was crafted for maximum effect. But ancient historians disagreed with the official version. Plutarch documented the events but questioned the snake. Cassius Dio recorded contradictions in the timeline. Strabo, who was in Alexandria shortly after her death, openly doubted the cobra story. The symptoms did not match. The method was too unreliable. Something else happened. The real story is not about how Cleopatra died. It is about what Octavian did to her before he allowed her to die. 10 days of systematic psychological warfare. 10 days designed to break her will completely. 10 days where every single element was calculated to force her into submission. This was not a suicide born from despair. This was the final act of a woman who spent 10 days trapped in an impossible choice. Octavian needed her alive. He needed her cooperative. He needed her walking through Rome in chains. And when she refused, when she chose death over humiliation, he simply built a replacement and paraded that instead. The destruction began on August 1st, 30 before Christ. Mark Antony was dying at the base of Cleopatra's tomb. He had fallen on his own sword after being told Cleopatra was already dead. Except she was not dead. She had locked herself inside with her 2 handmaidens and as much treasure as she could carry. The tomb stood near the temple of Isis, solid stone, 2 stories high, massive wooden doors, built like a fortress because Cleopatra understood that in death she would need protection. Antony's men begged her to open the doors. She refused. Octavian's soldiers were minutes away. Opening the door meant capture. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra and her attendants lowered ropes from the upper level. They hauled Antony upward to a high opening while he was still alive. His blood ran down the stone walls as they pulled. Think about that moment. The Queen of Egypt dragging her dying lover into her tomb because opening the door would end everything. Antony died in her arms on the upper level. His final words recorded by Plutarch were these: Do not pity me in this last turn of fate. I was the greatest of Romans, defeated only by another Roman." Then he was gone. Cleopatra had minutes to grieve before Octavian's forces arrived. But Octavian did not storm the tomb. He did not break down the doors. Instead, he sent a messenger named Proculus. The message was simple. Caesar wished to discuss terms of surrender and the future of her children. Cleopatra refused to open the doors. She spoke to Proculus through a narrow gap in the stone. She would only negotiate if Octavian guaranteed her children's safety. While she spoke, Proculus's men were climbing the outer walls. They entered through the same opening used to pull Antony inside just hours earlier. They took her completely by surprise. Cleopatra reached for a dagger hidden in her clothing. She tried to end it right there, but the soldiers were ready. They tackled her, disarmed her, restrained her. According to Cassius Dio, Cleopatra screamed as they seized her, "You will not take me alive to Rome. You will not parade me. Kill me now." But the soldiers had explicit orders: keep her alive. Use whatever force was necessary. Do not let her die under any circumstances. They carried her from the tomb and transported her to the palace. They sealed her inside a guarded chamber on the second floor. That moment, August 1st, was when the real destruction began. Octavian did not simply want Cleopatra dead. He needed something specific from her death. And that required time. He had 10 days before his ship sailed for Rome. 10 days to break her will completely. Egypt was now his. The wealthiest kingdom in the ancient world belonged to Rome, but Octavian faced a serious problem back home. He had just won a civil war. Romans killing Romans. Blood spilled by citizens against citizens that was difficult to justify to the Roman people. He needed to transform the narrative completely. Turn a civil war into something easier to accept. A war against a foreign enemy. A war against a dangerous queen from the east. The woman who had corrupted Mark Antony and threatened Rome itself. Cleopatra had to become the villain who made the war necessary. But Cleopatra was not a simple barbarian queen. She was educated, multilingual, politically brilliant. She had lived in Rome. She spoke fluent Latin. She had negotiated with senators and met with Cicero. Romans knew she was sophisticated. That created a propaganda problem. Complicated enemies do not make effective symbols. Octavian needed to simplify her completely. Transform her from a political rival into an image, the Eastern temptress, the Egyptian witch, the foreign corruption that had to be eliminated for Rome to survive. And most importantly, he needed to parade her through the streets of Rome in his triumph alive. Roman triumphs followed a specific formula. The defeated enemy king or queen was led through the streets in chains, displayed to the crowd, publicly degraded. Then, at the end of the parade, traditionally executed in the Tullianum prison. This was how Rome celebrated victory. Through ritualized humiliation of the conquered, Octavian's entire political future depended on that spectacle. He needed to parade Cleopatra through Rome as living proof that he had defeated the East. But Cleopatra understood that formula perfectly. She had been in Rome in 44 before Christ during Caesar's Gic triumph. She had watched as Vertoric, the GI king, was dragged through the streets in chains, then strangled to death in the Tullianum. She knew exactly what Octavian intended for her, and she would rather die than let it happen. Two wills in direct opposition. Octavian needed her alive for his triumph. Cleopatra wanted death to avoid that humiliation. He had 10 days to resolve this conflict. 10 days before his ships departed for Rome. His solution was not simply to prevent her death. That was too passive. He needed to break her desire to die. He needed to make her want to live. And to accomplish that, he would use the one thing she could not surrender: her children. The chamber where Cleopatra was held was chosen with precision. Second floor of the palace. One door. One small window, too narrow for a person to pass through. Guards stationed outside every hour of every day and night. Everything potentially dangerous had been removed. No knives, no daggers, no ropes, no sharp objects of any kind. No belts, no pins, nothing she could use to end her life. According to Plutarch, the guards searched her body every single day. They checked her clothing. They checked her hair. They were looking for hidden weapons, concealed poison, anything she might have smuggled inside. Cleopatra was stripped of everything except basic clothing. She was placed alone in an empty stone room. Bare walls, minimal furniture, complete surveillance, every interaction monitored, every movement reported. The guards had one mission: keep her alive. But Octavian's Coupian strategy went beyond physical confinement. He separated her from her two handmaidens immediately. Owain and Charmian had been with her in the tomb. They had helped pull Antony inside. They were the only people left who were completely loyal to her. Now they were kept in separate rooms. Cleopatra could hear them sometimes, their voices carrying faintly through the stone walls. But she was not allowed to speak to them, not allowed to plan with them, not allowed to share the weight of what was happening. She had no allies, no counsel, no one to help her think through the impossible choice she was facing. She was completely dependent on her captors for all information about her children, about negotiations, about what would happen next. Every piece of information came filtered through Octavian's control. This was isolation as a weapon. Strip someone of agency, remove their choices, make them dependent on their captor for even the most basic facts. But the most strategic separation involved her children. Cleopatra had 4 children. Caesarion was 17. The twins Alexander and Selene Baz were 10. The youngest, Polly, was just 6. All 4 were immediately separated from their mother, moved to different sections of the palace, kept under guard, locations withheld. Cleopatra could not see them, could not speak to them, could not confirm they were safe. On August 2nd, the day after her capture, Octavian sent a messenger, not Proculus this time, Cornelius Gallus, a poet, a soldier, a diplomat. The message was precise, controlled, elegant in its cruelty. Caesar wishes you to know that your children are being well cared for. Their future depends entirely on your cooperation. Should anything happen to you, Caesar cannot guarantee their safety. Caesarion in particular is in a very delicate position. Cleopatra understood the threat immediately. Caesarion was Julius Caesar's biological son. That alone made him dangerous to Octavian. Everything Octavian had built rested on being Caesar's adopted heir. His entire claim to power came from that adoption. But a living biological son undermined everything. If Cleopatra died, Caesarion would be completely unprotected. He would be eliminated. But if Cleopatra lived, if she cooperated, if she submitted to Octavian's demands, then maybe Caesarion would survive. Maybe all of her children would be spared. This was the trap Octavian constructed. He gave Cleopatra a reason to live that directly contradicted her reason to die. Her dignity demanded death. Death meant Octavian could never parade her through Rome. Death meant she controlled her own fate. But her children demanded survival. If she died, they were vulnerable. If she lived, they might be protected. For the next 10 days, Cleopatra existed inside that impossible choice. The space between dignity and motherhood. Both options destroyed something essential. Death meant abandoning her children to Octavian's mercy. Cooperation meant surrendering everything she was, walking through Rome in chains, being displayed like a conquered animal, becoming the symbol Octavian needed her to be. Sometimes she heard sounds through the narrow window, children's voices, laughter, playing, crying. She could not tell if the sounds were real or staged. Were they her children or other children brought near the window deliberately? Was this comfort or calculated cruelty? The uncertainty itself was a weapon. She was trapped between hope and paranoia. Every sound could mean her children were safe and nearby, or it could mean Octavian was manipulating her emotions. She had no way to verify anything, no way to confirm what was real. Modern psychology has a term for this: ambiguous information used as psychological warfare. Keep the target suspended between hope and fear. Never let them settle into either state. Octavian was not just preventing her death. He was weaponizing her love against her will, turning the one pure thing she had left into the instrument of her psychological destruction. If she loved her children, she had to consider cooperation. If she chose dignity, she had to accept that her children might die because of it. This was the machine Octavian built. 2 drives and perfect opposition. Motherhood pulling her toward survival and submission. Pride pulling her toward death and control. and no resolution possible. Because Octavian controlled all the information, he decided what she knew about her children. He decided what promises to make. He decided whether those promises were real or empty. For 10 days, she lived inside that trap, unable to escape, unable to choose, pulled in both directions simultaneously. On August 3rd, men arrived at her chamber. They carried measuring rods, marked ropes, wax tablets for notes. They measured her height. They estimated her weight. They measured the dimensions of her body like she was furniture, like she was an object to be fitted into a structure. Cleopatra asked what they were doing. One of the architects replied without hesitation, preparing for Caesar's triumph. The display must be properly constructed to accommodate you. Think about the impact of that moment. They were not planning in private. They were doing it in front of her, measuring her for her own humiliation. The message was clear. This is happening. You are going to Rome. We are building the cage now. But they did not come just once. They returned the next day. August 4th, then August 5th, then August 6th. Each day brought more measurements, more questions, more discussions about her upcoming parade. What clothing should she wear for maximum visual effect? What jewelry would Roman audiences recognize as distinctly Egyptian? Should she be in chains or simply restrained by guards? How should the platform be constructed to display her most effectively? They discussed these details in front of her, debated the presentation, analyzed the visual impact. They spoke about her degradation as if it were an artistic project, as if she were not sitting right there listening, as if her humiliation were a technical problem to solve rather than a human being's destruction. This was not planning. This was conditioning. Every day the architects returned. Death became more appealing. But every day Octavian balanced that pole with another message. Reports about her children. Caesarion asked after you today. He is worried. He needs his mother. The younger ones are asking when they can see you. They miss you. Pull her toward death with the horror of the triumph. Pull her back toward life with fear for her children. Push and pull simultaneously. Keep her suspended in the impossible choice. Never let her settle on death. Never let her accept cooperation. Trap her in the middle where every option feels unbearable. This was systematic. Every element calculated. Every pressure point identified and exploited. Cleopatra was alone in that chamber through all of it. No one to share the weight with. No one to help her think through what was real and what was manipulation. No one to remind her who she was before all of this started. Just the daily visits from architects measuring her body. The daily reports about children she could not see or verify were safe. The stone walls, the narrow window, the guards outside, and the impossible choice that grew heavier every single day. For 6 days, this continued. 6 days of architects, 6 days of children reports, 6 days of being pulled in opposite directions. By August 7th, something had to break. By August 7th, Cleopatra stopped eating. When guards brought food to her chamber, she refused it. She sat in silence, staring at the stone walls, not speaking, not engaging. Complete withdrawal from everything around her. The guards reported this immediately. Octavian's response reveals how carefully he was managing every element. He did not force her to eat. He did not threaten her. He did not increase pressure. Instead, he brought Caesarion. For the first time in 6 days, Cleopatra saw her oldest son. The meeting was brief. Guards stood close the entire time. But Plutarch records what Caesarion said to his mother. Please eat. Please take care of yourself. I need you. We all need you. Then the guards took him away. That night, Cleopatra ate. And that tells you everything about the effectiveness of Octavian's weapon. The threat to her children was no longer abstract. It was no longer a message delivered by soldiers. It had her son's face, his voice, his plea. How do you choose death when your child is begging you to live? How do you prioritize dignity over the person standing in front of you asking you not to die? This was the moment the trap tightened completely. She was not just fighting for control of her own fate anymore. She was fighting against her son's voice in her head, against the memory of his face, against the knowledge that refusing food meant causing him pain. Every meal she refused, Caesarion worried. Every day she resisted, her children suffered. Octavian had just shown her the cost was not theoretical. It was immediate. It was personal. It was her 17-year-old son asking her to survive, and she could not unhear that, could not forget the way he looked at her, could not ignore the desperation in his voice. For 6 days, Octavian had been pulling her in 2 directions, but this was different. This was not a message about her children. This was her child himself being used as the message, brought into the chamber specifically to break her resistance, then taken away before she could find comfort in his presence. Just enough contact to weaponize her love, not enough to provide actual support. This was psychological warfare at its most precise, and it worked. She ate that night. The hunger strike was over. Octavian had won that particular battle, but the war was not finished yet. On August 8th, Octavian came to her chamber himself. It was the first time he had spoken directly to Cleopatra since her capture. He came alone, except for guards stationed outside the door. This meeting was not impulse. He had waited 7 full days before making this personal visit. He waited until she was worn down by the architects, worn down by isolation, worn down by not seeing her children, worn down by hearing Caesarion beg her to eat. Only then did he come to offer what looked like a solution. The timing was calculated perfectly. We do not have a complete record of the conversation, but fragments survive from Plutarch, who interviewed people who were there, from Cassius Dio, who had access to Roman state records, from Strabo, who arrived in Alexandria shortly after these events. The offer Octavian made was straightforward. Participate willingly in the triumph. Walk through Rome under your own power. You will not be in chains. You will retain some dignity and defeat, some control over how you are presented. In exchange, your children live. All of them, including Caesarion. They will be raised in Rome as wards of the state, educated, protected, given proper futures. Then he explained the alternative. Refuse this offer, and you die. Caesarion dies the same day you die. The younger children might survive. They might not. No promises can be made about their safety if you are gone. But if you cooperate, if you help make this triumph successful, then I guarantee all 4 of your children will be protected. Cleopatra asked for time to consider. Octavian gave her 3 days. After that, we sailed for Rome with or without your cooperation. Choose. Then he left her alone again. Alone with a choice he had just constructed. This was the brilliance of the trap. He was not offering escape. He was offering justification. A way for Cleopatra to tell herself that enduring humiliation served a higher purpose, that surrender was not weakness, but sacrifice, that walking through Rome in chains was actually an act of love, protecting her children by giving Octavian what he wanted. It was a lie. Octavian was never going to spare Caesarion. The boy was too dangerous. Julius Caesar's biological son could not be allowed to live. Not when Octavian's entire authority rested on being Caesar's adopted heir. A living biological son undermined that claim completely. Caesarion had to die. Octavian knew it, but Cleopatra did not know it yet. For 3 days, she lived suspended between hope and despair, between believing cooperation might save her children and suspecting the promises were hollow. She had no way to verify anything, no way to confirm whether Octavian was telling the truth, no allies to counsel her, no information except what he chose to give her. 3 days of weighing her dignity against her children's lives, 3 days of imagining herself walking through Rome while crowds jeered. 3 days of wondering if that sacrifice would actually mean anything. 3 days of Octavian winning even without physically taking her to Rome because she was considering it. She was actually thinking about submitting, and that consideration alone was a victory for him. On August 11th, something changed. We do not know exactly what happened. The ancient sources are unclear, fragmented, but something broke the spell Octavian had constructed. Something made Cleopatra understand the truth she had been trying not to see. Maybe she overheard guards speaking when they thought she could not hear. Maybe someone loyal to her managed to pass a message through the stone walls. Maybe she simply understood Octavian well enough to see through the performance. However it happened, by August 11th, Cleopatra knew Caesarion was going to die regardless of what she chose. The negotiations were theater. The promises were hollow. Cooperation would change nothing. Octavian intended to eliminate her son, no matter what she did, because Caesarion was not just her child. He was a political threat that could not be managed or contained, only removed. If she went to Rome and cooperated, she would be paraded, and Caesarion would die. If she refused and was taken by force, she would be paraded, and Caesarion would die. If she ended her own life right now, Caesarion would still die. There was no scenario where her son survived, no choice that protected him. She had been negotiating with a lie for 10 days, torturing herself over an impossible decision that was never real. The trap had been empty from the beginning. This understanding changed everything. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra then made a specific request. She asked permission to visit Antony's tomb. She said she wished to make offerings to honor his memory before the journey to Rome. It was a reasonable request, traditional, expected of a widow. Octavian granted it without hesitation. Why not? She appeared to be cooperating now, preparing herself for Rome, accepting her fate. She was taken to the tomb under heavy guard, the same tomb where she had barricaded herself on August 1st, where she had pulled Antony inside while he bled, where she had watched him die in her arms. The soldiers allowed her inside for 1 hour. They watched as she made offerings, watched her pray, watched her pour libations over the place where Antony had died. They were watching for weapons, watching for anything dangerous, but they did not see the small clay vial hidden within the tomb's wall during those first desperate hours of barricade. She palmed it, slipped it into her clothing, the poison she had prepared as insurance 10 days earlier. She had known from the very beginning this moment might come. This was not impulse. This was activating a contingency plan. When she was returned to her chamber, Cleopatra asked for a meal. She specifically requested fresh figs from the market. The guards inspected the basket carefully. They looked for hidden weapons, poison, anything dangerous. They saw only fruit. They let it through. Everything was now in place for August 12th. Early morning on August 12th, the guards outside Cleopatra's chamber heard nothing unusual. No screams, no struggle, no sounds of distress, just silence. Around the 3rd hour of the day, they opened the door to bring her breakfast. Cleopatra was dead. She lay on a golden couch, dressed in full royal regalia, crown, jewelry, ceremonial robes, everything that marked her as pharaoh. Everything Octavian had tried to strip away. Her 2 handmaidens were with her. Somehow, they had been reunited for this final act. I was already dead at the foot of the couch. Charmian was still barely alive, using her remaining strength to straighten the diadem on Cleopatra's head, making sure the crown sat properly. According to Plutarch, one of the guards asked her a question. Was this well done? Charmian replied with her final breath. Extremely well, and fitting for a descendant of so many kings. Then she died. Cleopatra was 39 years old. This is where the story of the snake enters popular history. The dramatic version claims Cleopatra hid an asp inside the basket of figs, an Egyptian cobra, symbol of royalty. It makes for powerful imagery, but several ancient historians doubted that account. Strabo questioned it directly. The timeline does not align properly. The symptoms recorded do not clearly match cobra venom, and snakes are notoriously unreliable as methods of death. They do not always bite. Their venom does not always work quickly. What makes more sense based on the evidence is simpler. Cleopatra had obtained poison earlier. She hid it in Antony's tomb during those first hours of barricade. She retrieved it during her final visit on August 11th. The method matters less than what the death represented. This was not ending her life out of despair. This was not a broken woman giving up. This was a final act of control after 10 days of having control stripped away. A message to Octavian, written in the only language she had left. You cannot have this victory. You can take my kingdom. You can destroy my line. You can eliminate my children. But you cannot take my choice. You cannot parade me through Rome. You cannot have that satisfaction. I am choosing this. I am deciding how this ends. She died on her own terms, dressed as a queen, surrounded by the symbols of power Octavian had worked so carefully to remove. For 10 days, he tried to break her, tried to make her choose life, so he could use her for his triumph, tried to weaponize her love for her children to force surrender. Her death was her refusal, her final answer to everything he had built. She staged it deliberately, dressed for it like a ceremony, made it royal and dignified. Even in death, she was controlling the image, denying Octavian the humiliated, broken queen he needed, giving him a dead pharaoh instead. Regal, unbroken, still wearing the crown, the soldiers carried the news to Octavian immediately. His reaction is not recorded, but his response tells you everything about how power operates. When you cannot have what you want, you simply change what people remember. When the real version does not serve you, you build a replacement. And that is exactly what Octavian did. Octavian could not parade the real Cleopatra through Rome, so he built a substitute. During his triumph months later, a massive effigy of Cleopatra was carried through the streets. A statue with a snake attached to her arm, draped in chains, presented exactly as he had wanted to present the living woman. The Roman crowd saw Cleopatra in Octavian's triumph, saw her defeated, saw her reduced to the image he wanted them to remember, the exotic Eastern queen who died by snakebite, the dangerous seductress who corrupted Mark Antony, the foreign threat that had to be eliminated. The propaganda worked perfectly. That version of Cleopatra became the story that survived for 2,000 years. The romantic death, the asp and the figs, the tragic queen choosing a symbolic end, everything Octavian needed people to believe. He lost the living woman but won the narrative completely. Sometimes power is just controlling what people remember. And then there was Caesarea. The child Cleopatra died hoping she might somehow protect. He was murdered 3 weeks after her death. Octavian sent assassins to intercept him as he fled toward India. Julius Caesar's only biological son, 17 years old, killed on the road in the Egyptian desert. He was always going to die. The promises Octavian made were always empty. Cleopatra's cooperation would have changed nothing. Her death saved nothing. Some historians recorded Octavian's reasoning for the execution. Too many Caesars is not good. That was it. That was the justification. The boy's existence threatened everything, so he was eliminated efficiently, quietly. The younger children survived, but survival was not mercy. Alexander, Selene, and Tommy were paraded in Octavian's triumph, walked through Rome as defeated enemy children, displayed as trophies, then given to Octavian's sister, Octavia, to raise. They were watched constantly. Their futures were limited deliberately. They were never allowed to return to Egypt, never allowed real power or influence. Raised as symbols of Rome's victory over the East, living proof that Egypt had been conquered, that the Ptolemaic dynasty was finished. Cleopatra died believing her choice might protect them. In reality, they became propaganda tools. Octavian got everything he wanted from them anyway. He got his propaganda victory with the effigy and the triumph. He got the elimination of all political threats. He got complete conquest of Egypt and its wealth. He got control of the entire story, and Cleopatra's death bought nothing except the manner of her death itself. That is what those 10 days reveal about power at its most systematic. Octavian did not just want to defeat Cleopatra. He wanted to dismantle her psychologically first, turn her love for her children into a weapon against her will, construct an impossible choice and force her to live inside it, measure her for humiliation, show her exactly what awaited in Rome, offer false hope that cooperation might save what mattered most. It was a machine, every element calculated, every pressure point identified, every moment designed to strip agency until surrender felt rational. When Cleopatra chose death anyway, when she denied Octavian the satisfaction he had worked 10 days to achieve, he simply adapted, paraded an image instead, built the narrative he needed without her living cooperation. That is real power, not the ability to eliminate enemies. The ability to control the story even when your enemy denies you. So, did Cleopatra win or lose? She denied him the satisfaction of parading her living body through Rome. She controlled the exact manner of her death. She died with dignity restored. She refused to become the broken, humiliated queen Octavian needed. But Octavian still got his propaganda victory. Her children were paraded in her place. Caesarion was eliminated. the false story became history. Egypt was absorbed into Rome completely. Her death bought nothing except control over that final choice. Was that enough? Was controlling that one thing worth everything it cost? There is no easy answer. Sometimes the only choice left is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and buys nothing, except the knowledge that the choice was still yours. That in a system designed to strip away all agency, you found one decision they could not take. Cleopatra died a queen alone in a sealed stone room, accompanied only by 2 loyal handmaidens who chose to die with her. She failed to save her kingdom, failed to save her children, failed to stop Octavian from building exactly the narrative he wanted. She succeeded only in denying him one specific satisfaction: the sight of her walking through Rome in chains, the image of her broken and cooperative, the validation that his psychological machine had worked. Whether that mattered is a question without resolution. Whether it was victory or defeat or both depends entirely on what you believe has value. Control of outcome versus control of choice. The story the world remembers versus the truth of what you chose. Protecting others versus protecting yourself. These 10 days existed in the space where all those things collided, where every option destroyed something essential. Octavian built a psychological machine designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before her death. It was systematic, calculated, precise. He identified every pressure point, isolated her completely, weaponized her children, measured her for humiliation, offered false hope, applied constant pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. It came very close to working. She considered cooperation. She weighed the options. She tortured herself over whether submission might save her children. For 10 days, she lived inside that impossible choice. But in the end, she chose death. Not because it saved anything, not because it changed Octavian's plans, but because it was the only choice he could not take from her, the only decision that remained entirely hers. And she took it.